Well, as we continue to get closer to the official start of NFL training camp, one by one, predictions are starting to come in about how the divisions will shape up and teams will finish in the playoff race. And we're seeing a consistent message among the national media. The Seahawks are being overlooked and in some cases dismissed as a contender, which is interesting because optimism here among the Seahawks fan base seems to be extremely high. Why is that? I think there are some specific reasons for it, and we're going to dive into that today on this edition of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome to Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. You can follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, oddly enough. Happy Blue Friday, everybody. Been on a bit of a hiatus the last couple of weeks. I keep promising that I'll get back into it, and that's going to start now. So welcome back. If you like what I do, first time or long time viewer, be sure to subscribe on the YouTube channel and hit that bell button so you get notification of future episodes. You can also follow the show and subscribe to it on any audio podcast platform. If you want to hear episodes without ads, you can do that only on Spotify. It is a very low monthly fee. You'll see that link in the description. And if you just want to support the show, you can look for that super like and super thanks button on YouTube. Or you can buy me a coffee or a beer. Much appreciated. So yeah, it's prediction time, right? And now we have a target. We know that the official start of training camp for the Seahawks will be July 17th. So we are less than a month away of rookies beginning their workouts. Veterans join them on the 23rd, I believe, and then it's going to go quick. And before you know it, there's the joint practices with Tennessee Titans, preseason games, and then the Denver Broncos will visit here in September. And while, you know, the general messaging that I see on social media and interaction on this channel in the comments is overwhelmingly positive, that I think we've talked a lot about how the roster is improved as a whole, that it's young, talented, and deep with some dynamic players at the top. We talked last week with Bill Alfstad and Keith Myers about blue chip players and ascending players that are on the verge of being blue chip players. And the reputation that Mike Macdonald brings with him as one of the more dynamic and smart young head coaching candidates to come along in the last couple of years, and how he's changing things on defense in the NFL. And that was really the Seahawks' biggest weakness last year. And they've added some talent to the mix. So why is it that we're seeing all of these national publications and writers and entities not only picking the Seahawks to finish out of the playoffs, but in many cases to have a losing record, and in a growing number of instances to finish behind the Arizona Cardinals in the NFC West? Here's some examples. Pro Football Network picks the Seahawks to finish 8-9, finish third in the NFC West. Fox Sports, 7 wins, dead last, fourth after the Cardinals in the NFC West. Colin Cowherd has the Seahawks finishing fourth, with Arizona making the playoffs. The Seahawks have largely been left out of Pro Football Focus's positional rankings. In some cases, those are understandable, but in some, I think there have been some positions and individuals in some of the solo rankings and duo rankings that they do that have been overlooked. ESPN Analytics has the Hawks as 21st out of 32 teams in their power ranking. And then Adam Rank of NFL.com comes out the other day and picks the Seahawks to finish not only fourth in the NFC West, but to only win 5 of their 17 games. What gives? Why is it that the Seahawks are being overlooked and slept on, I believe, by so many in the national media? It's much easier to find examples like I just listed than it is to find anyone that thinks they're going to upset the Rams or 49ers. And you know how sports predictors work. It's kind of like being a movie critic or a music critic. Sometimes they don't want to give credit to the blockbuster. They don't want to pick the low-hanging fruit. They want to be different. They want to find that indie band no one knows about before everybody knows about them. So when they blow up, they can take credit for finding them. Same with the movies. But yet you're not finding anyone saying, hey, I think the Seahawks have a real shot to win 10, 11 games. This thing could really work immediately. No one's doing that. Well, I've identified some reasons, 5, 6 reasons that I'm going to list for you here that I think it does make sense. And it's easy to get worked up about that as a fan because we take pride in our team and we want to be recognized. And, you know, the tribunal nature of sports fandom and the territorial nature is such that it's not just enough to enjoy the team for your own, on your own, for your own reasons, but you want others to acknowledge that. And that's not happening right now. I don't get worked up about those things like I used to. I just ask the question of why. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I think a lot of you watch the channel, because that's just how my brain works. And that's the approach. I've come up with some reasons. I think number one is that there are a lot of unknowns with the new coaching staff. And so it's a little bit harder, I think, for some of these analysts to grab onto something tangible and say, that's why I think they're going to win 10, 11, 12 games. Even though Mike Macdonald was, or has been, universally praised as a difference maker and someone who's changing the game defensively in the NFL. There will be 6 teams this year in the NFL that will be trying to install and adopt his scheme that it worked so well at the University of Michigan and with the Baltimore Ravens, with other teams hiring his assistants away from the Ravens to be their defensive coordinators and changing to that scheme, and Jesse Minter following Jim Harbaugh from Michigan to the Chargers to do the same, and other examples. He has that reputation, but yet nobody seems to be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. And that gets into some of the other reasons here. Second reason, I think sometimes analysts are lazy, especially the national ones. And look, I can understand this a little bit in the sense that I spent some time working for a website called NFL Mocks that covers the NFL draft. And I was tasked with having to focus on teams outside of my normal view, outside of just covering the Seahawks. And no matter how much research and legwork you put into doing that, you'll never know another team as intimately as your own because you don't follow it, think about it, sleep, breathe it every single day. But in some cases, I don't even think the effort is even there. And I think people hold on to, it's kind of the opposite of recency bias. They don't look at the new information. They hold on to long-held biases that have been built up over time. And they can't shake those things. Yeah, some examples. Seahawks offensive line is bad, and until they fix that, they're not going anywhere. Well, that's been largely true. But we've talked a lot on this show about the talent infusion up front, all across that line. And that I think more so than any offseason that I can remember, the Seahawks have attacked that position. There was some concern in about March that they weren't doing enough on the interior, but then they really attacked it. And there are so many bodies there, talented bodies, young bodies, and then you add a guy like Laken Tomlinson to the mix, who's just a workhorse and an Iron Man. It's just proven to be a steady, just a steady presence on the offensive line, and he's now already stepping up and establishing himself as one of the leaders. He's been named to that 9-person players committee, right? That leadership committee that Mike Macdonald has formed. He's already making an impact. You know, they add Christian Haynes in the draft and Satawa Lamea and Michael Jarrell. McClendon Curtis has been taking the first team reps. Everyone wants to forget about him. Anthony Bradford, 4th-round pick last year, started 10 games. Olu Oluwatimi, the Outland Trophy and Remington Award winner out of Michigan, in his second year has taken over the center spot. There's a lot of reason for optimism. And now we see the Abe Lucas stuff coming out about how strong he looks in his workouts, not wearing a knee brace. He's running again, everything, the arrow pointing up for him coming back and hopefully being close to what he was, but they go out and they sign George Fant just in case, just an absolute solid pro who can play left and right side. They've done so much more to make sure that offensive line has a chance to succeed under first-year offensive line coach Scott Huff. I think that's being overlooked and dismissed. Another example, the run defense has been so bad. Until they fix that, they're not going anywhere. Well, how much more do you have to do? Look at that defensive line group, and how deep and talented it is. And I include the outside linebackers in that. Talent from everywhere. So much more talent than last year that your margin for error is going to be a lot greater. Whereas last year and in years previous, we heard so much about run fits and reads and assignments and guys being in the wrong place. Some of that was because we just weren't beating teams at the point of attack. It's going to happen a lot more now this year. Plus, you add Mike Macdonald to that, the quote unquote Sean McVay of defense. It's hard to, that's the one constant here. It's hard for me to kind of wrap my head around the fact that he is so universally respected as a defensive coach, and yet the Seahawks are still being counted out because the run defense was pathetic the last 2 years. To me, that's lazy analysis. You have to be willing to look at what could be. And I'm going to tie that all in with how it may have worked with the former coach at the end of this. Another reason, and I touched on this already a little bit, but writers want to get your attention and be different. And while I mentioned that they weren't doing that when it comes to the Seahawks, they are in regards to the Arizona Cardinals. And I'll get more into that in a minute. Another one, and I think this is one that's not going to go away until or unless we see just a massive year out of them. There's some uncertainty nationally and, well, even locally about the quarterback position. When it comes to these predictions, that's a lot of weight is being given to that. Some too much weight in the wrong areas. Another Cardinals reference. Spoiler alert. And there's some who doubt Geno Smith and who question him. And just for context, we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and I'm not going to get into that too deeply, but I saw a couple of new contextual stats and stat lines posted in the last 48 hours that I thought were intriguing. Here's one. 2022 and 2023 combined NFL quarterbacks. Basically what they did is they found a way to narrow down these stats to just meaningful snaps. So this only includes full-time starters who had 400 snaps or more. No passes behind the line of scrimmage. So no cheapy 60-yard gains because you just flip it out into the flat. We take those out. No garbage time, right? If the win probability is more than 90% or less than 10%, that's considered garbage time. We take that out. No kneel downs or spikes. We take those snaps out. No penalties. Take those snaps out. When you do all of that, just meaningful snaps. In the last 2 years, Geno Smith ranks first in the NFL in success rate, second in total EPA, third in EPA per play. Think about that. He also led the league in big-time throw percentage on deep passes for the second straight year in 2023. Tuck that away and remember that when I come back to talking about Kyler Murray in just a moment. And he also did that despite the challenges on the offensive line and a defense that was so bad it couldn't get off the field. So the Seahawks had the least number of plays run in the NFL last year and the 30th number of drives on offense. So he had fewer opportunities, and the pressure on those opportunities was even greater. He had the fourth best pressure to sack ratio while also having the fifth highest percentage of dropbacks under pressure. Just a couple of things to keep in mind. And this ties back into the lazy analysis reason that I cited. You hear this a lot, and I just saw as I was preparing for the show and looking over some of those projections and the things that the analysts had written, you see a lot of Geno had a really unexpectedly good 2022, and then he took a step back in 2023. That is so simplistic and lazy. Because while he got off to a bad start last year, John Schneider even said this, started great in 2022, finished poorly. Last year started poorly, and then it changed, right? Nobody was harder on him for that Cincinnati Bengals performance on the road than I was. But something changed the next week at home against Cleveland. In the second half, something clicked. In his last 7 games last year, Geno Smith had a QB rating of just under 100, and that included a really bad game against the 49ers when he had a 70 rating. And over those last 7 games, 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And that came at a time when the defense had just completely collapsed. There was no hope at that point. And the offensive line was as bad as it's ever been. Lucas tried to come back, couldn't make it. There was no running game at all. It was all on his shoulders in those last 7 games, and yet he throws 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So just a little bit of context there. But I think that's one of the reasons that some of the national media just don't believe in Geno yet, or maybe never will, because sometimes it's hard to change those guys' minds. And so it's hard for them to believe in the team. Another reason, there's no more Pete Carroll. That was a known quantity, and it was also a revered personality. In fact, I would argue that the last couple of years, some of these preseason predictions have overrated the Seahawks' chances because Pete Carroll was there, even though the roster didn't really support those projections. One of the reasons is because of the success he had in the past, but also that his offseason messaging was always so positive, so optimistic. We're going to fix it. We're going to do this. We've got plans. We're making moves. Don't worry about what happened last year. We're going to fix that. That was his messaging. Whereas Macdonald's messaging is a lot more measured and thoughtful and balanced. He says a lot of things like, we're not sure yet. We don't know what we're good at yet. Some positive signs, but we're going to have to see. I think that messaging tends to influence people. And Carroll not being here may kind of, make that arrow trend down a little bit. I made this argument recently on the show, and I'll say it again. I think this would be different. If Pete Carroll had remained, if he was still the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and John Schneider went out and executed the exact same offseason for Pete that he did for Mike Macdonald, those improvements on the offensive line and all the talent thrown at it that I mentioned, the same free agent class, the same draft class, adding all that talent to defense, the secondary is talented as they look. Devin Witherspoon going into his second year. That defensive line, bringing Leonard Williams back out of free agency, adding Byron Murphy to that. I mean, Pete Carroll must be sitting at home shaking his head. Why not me? I think if that had been the case, I think it'd be a whole different story with some of these projections. I really do. I don't think Adam Rank could be picking the Seahawks to finish 5-12. And then my final point that I've been teasing. Let's pump the brakes on the Arizona Cardinals hype train, okay? I get it. As I said before, people want to attach to the new kid on the block and the young up-and-comer, right? And they like the new shiny toy. And the Cardinals, even though they won, they only won 4 games last year, right? They played better than it was expected, especially considering that roster on defense. I mean, you take that safety group away, and there wasn't much there. And then the first 8 games of the year without Kyler Murray. But I don't know if it's time yet to start anointing the Cardinals as a potential playoff team and the up-and-comer in the NFC. I mean, Marvin Harrison's a fun player, and that was a huge get for them. Bona fide, blue-chip, superstar talent. Boom, right there. But the rest of that wide receiver room has a lot of work to do. So teams are going to be able to focus on him. They've done some nice work on the offensive line. They should be able to run the football this year again. I think Jonathan Gannon had that team better prepared on a week-in, week-out basis than I thought he was going to, because I thought his hiring and his offseason, some of the things he said leading up to the season last year were so awkward and cringy. But it looks like he can coach. And this year they got a massive infusion of talent on the defensive side, which they really needed. They had a deep draft, tons of draft picks. 2 drafts in a row where new GM Monty Austin-Ford has really worked the draft board to add a lot of volume. And there's some nice players in there. There's a lot of players that we've talked about leading up to the draft that I had in Seahawk mocks. But outside of Harrison, I don't know that there's a lot of dynamic, big-time ceiling upside players. There's some high floor players. I don't know about the ceiling. Now, that's what they needed. They need to improve that roster to the point that they can go out in the offseason and attract free agents to put them over the top. They weren't able to do that this year. But I think it's a little premature. They're going to be an awfully young roster, and they still have some significant shortcomings up front on defense. I don't know if they're going to be able to get after the passer. And then there's Kyler Murray. If you've watched this show or listened to me for any length of time at all, you know that I'm not a huge fan. I don't think he has that it quality. I don't think he's a special player or leader. There have been concerns and whispers, not even whispers, just outright cries about his lack of leadership and commitment leading up to last year. Now, last year was a quiet year. He's coming off an ACL. He didn't get any trouble in that manner. There were no stories about him being a divisive influence. I don't remember seeing any clips of him calling out receivers on the field, blaming others for his bad throws. But I think how well he played last year is being completely overblown. When he came back those last 8 games, he was a ball control point guard. He was a check down master. He wasn't making plays downfield. The thing that scared you about Kyler Murray's first couple of years, even though from the get-go, I didn't believe he had those special qualities. Like, he'll take plays off. Like, there's 3rd and 8s where he'll sail the ball 5 yards over a receiver's head and walk off the field looking like Rick Meyer used to, with just a blank expression on his face. Like, it didn't piss him off in the least. I don't know that he's a winner. But also, his style of play last year, to finish my earlier point, it was what scared us the first couple of years was his ability to create and move and run. But also, he was pretty surgical down the field. Like, the arm talent is special. And it shows up sometimes. But last year, 6.7 yards per attempt. You know, he had a couple games where he had 80% completions for 250 yards. 6.7 yards per attempt is 25th best in the NFL. By comparison, Brock Purdy was technically second in the league. Mason Rudolph was first, but he didn't have as many snaps. 9.6 yards, a full 3 yards different for Brock Purdy in an offense that a lot of people think is getting it out to Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. And there's people that think Kyler Murray is a superior talent to Brock Purdy. 6.7 yards per attempt versus 9.6 yards per attempt. I didn't see anything last year that changed my mind about Kyler Murray. And at what point do we stop waiting for that to come out in him? I don't know. Maybe there is another level. Maybe he has matured. Maybe there's some perspective he's gained after having it taken away from him with the knee injury. Because the talent is there. Maybe he will put it all together. But assuming that when we have 5 years of sample size, I don't know. By the way, just for comparison, Geno Smith was 13th in the NFL in yards per completion or per attempt. And to be fair, not everyone is underselling them badly. Cynthia Froyland of NFL.com with her analytics programs says she thinks they're being undervalued. She acknowledges she thinks they're being overlooked. Has them at 9 wins, but says if that run defense is fixed, that it could be much higher than that. Brett Coleman, who I had on the show here, big-time content creator that focuses on the entire league, has them making the playoffs along with the Rams, so 3 teams out of the NFC West. Vegas has them pretty firmly in 3rd place in the division. I'm not saying I expect anyone to pick them to beat the Rams or to finish above the Rams or the 49ers, not this year. I'm not. But they have them pretty firmly in 3rd with a shot to make the playoffs if they show that improvement on defense. Joe Marino of the Draft Dudes and Locked On NFL, pretty bullish on the Seahawks. And recently, when he was looking at their entire roster as a whole, called that defensive line group one of the deepest in the entire NFL, with maybe the Cleveland Browns being one of the only teams that could rival it as far as full depth, 1st and 2nd team, including the outside linebackers. So not everybody is overlooking the Seahawks, but enough are that I thought it was worth looking into. Do you think they're being treated unfairly or they're being overlooked? How do you guys feel about potential win totals now, less than a month away from training camp? Coming up on the show on Monday, I know it was supposed to happen last week, just didn't work out. Jeff Simmons of Real Hawk Talk is going to join the show again, and we're going to take a look at a projected 2025 Seahawks roster and what that might look like with guys currently under contract, and try to identify some of the weak points and things they might want to attack in free agency or the draft, and we'll see how the salary cap all fits in with that as well. And then Sunday night on another channel, this will be fun. Check out Bryce and Ryan on the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast, great friends of me and the show, and a growing podcast that you absolutely need to be watching. We're going to get together. I think it's a live episode, so stay tuned. I'll make sure and get the information out about showtime on my Twitter feed at Seahawks Forever. We're going to be building an all-time Seahawks roster. That's going to be fun. It's kind of stuff I love doing in the offseason. And then we're going to crank this thing up again over the next couple of weeks, get you ready for training camp with some other cool topics coming up as well. Until then, follow me on Twitter, subscribe at all the places, and do all the things. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.